Hi, everybody. Dave Whitmarsh here from Whitmarsh Consulting Group. Have a very special guest today. Oh, it looks like she smiled over that. And so she's going to run a session on AI and predictive analytics. And I'll tell you, let me give you a little story about Trish here, and hopefully I don't make her blush. But a few years ago, I was doing pulling together a technology-enabled leadership certification program, and a number of people told me you have to talk to Trish, and so I tracked her down and definitely helped put that program together. And then I reached back out to her about 6 months ago, and or maybe even less, and very excited to see the work that she's done in AI. And I should say, Trish, we do have Emma speaking at the end of the day, and so
Mhm.
Trish is a real innovator in the process, the way that she thinks and the way that she sees things. And I'm sure you guys are going to love this session. So without inflating Trish's ego too much, I'll let her take over now.
That sounds good. Well, thanks for that, Dave. I really appreciate that introduction. So I will live up to that introduction in this session, or at least aspire to appreciate that. So hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to dive into artificial intelligence and predictive analytics in the workplace, at work, with our workforce and our workers, of course. And I'm just really curious as we kind of get underway here, is to just think about, like, what do we mean by artificial intelligence and predictive analytics? Like, what are we using those things as tools in service to? Um, and we're going to use, as we get going here, we're going to go ahead and use the chat in just a few minutes. But I'm just wondering, what do you think artificial intelligence and predictive analytics are all about? And how is it that we're using them, again, as tools applied to not only human resources in the broader scope, but in talent development and learning and talent development specifically, and how it is we upskill, reskill, and new skill our workforce? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So to start us off, let me give you a little bit of a definition of how it is that I tend to use these tools or think about these tools in reference to developing people, right? Our people development initiatives. And this is really where it's at. It's about decision science. At the end of the day, it's not really about the technology at all. It's about being able to turn the data that we've got flowing through our organizations that we are producing on a regular basis. How do we turn those data into decisions? And one of the things that we've been finding actually for about the past 7 or 8 years now is that organizations are shifting from what we would have started calling in the 1990s information processing to now we're moving more towards cognitive computing. And that change is not only about how do we capture and how do we store data, but how do we turn that data into actual organizational intelligence that we can use in order to inform business decisions? And when we're talking about human resources and when we're talking about business decisions within the domains of learning and talent development, then we're talking about how it is that we use data to turn it into decisions that we make about our people and our people strategy. So this just gives you a cool definition from Bernard Marr, somebody who I have great respect for. Bernard Marr's practice is about artificial intelligence and other disruptive technologies across every domain in every sector around the world. But I really like this for purposes of what we're talking about today. And so competitive advantage is for organizations that can do this faster, organizations that can leverage data to decisions in a meaningful way. And again, especially around developing their people and attending to the needs of their workforce. So this could also go into things like employee engagement. This could also go into feedback loops within our organizations, which of course would be very important to employee engagement, and then into learning and talent development, recruiting, retention, all of the major disciplines within the HR function. But again, specifically, we'll talk about learning and talent development today. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's not in isolation. I'm sure as many of you are aware, or at least can sort of have this like feeling, there's a whole bunch of disruptive technologies that seem to be descending upon our organizations right now. That are disrupting and deconstructing the work that we do in the workplace. And none of them are happening in isolation. As a matter of fact, what's going to happen with these different technologies, and you can see some of those technologies in this cyclone image on the screen, what we're going to see with these technologies is eventually they're going to converge. They're going to continue to converge. And so I want you to think about that for a moment. Like if you think about like if I pick up my smartphone here, right? If I pick up this particular device and the laptop that I'm sitting on, it used to be that there were two different functions that we used to do on the individual devices, right? So there was a time on my phone when a cell phone was just a phone, right? We just used it for being able to make phone calls and maybe keep track of our contacts. And we used to use our laptops and our desktops to be able to access the internet. And now we've got, of course, all sorts of different devices, and the number of which and the variety of which are growing, that can connect us to the internet, that can connect us to all sorts of information, historical information, information that we're generating real time. We've got all these different devices. So we can see the convergence where it used to be that we used to do some things on some devices. Now it is that we can do a broad range of activities across devices, like being able to access information on the internet, being able to access information about ourselves, be able to access information about each other. It's not just restricted to devices anymore. It's sort of this omni-channel sort of experience. And we're finding the same thing with these other technologies. So in this shift, which is really the greatest transformation we've ever had in technology before, moving from information technology to cognitive computing and being able to make decisions based on organizational intelligence, all of these different technologies are beginning to play a role. We're going to focus today on artificial intelligence, but again, it doesn't operate independent of these other technologies. It's going to continue to converge and enable and empower many of these other tools as they come into our organizations. So what is that doing to work? And what is that doing to our workforce and to our workers, to our people? What impact is that having? Well, the World Economic Forum, way back in 2016, actually made this prediction. They predicted that 29% of workforce skills, we'd have skills instability by the year 2020. And what we have found, of course, because they couldn't have anticipated the pandemic for all of 2020 and, of course, going now into 2021, but we couldn't have anticipated that, but what's happened is that's really accelerated the process. It's really accelerated this automation and this adoption of these different tools in order for organizations to be able to compete with each other and to compete with new organizations and disruptors that are coming into their industries. Is again this shift from information processing to cognitive computing. And so what's that is doing is that's shifting, as many of you are aware, a lot of the tasks that we as humans have done in the workplace before is now going to the machine. And it's not just physical machines. Like oftentimes we think of automation, we think of like robots in maybe a factory environment or a warehouse environment, but we also have machines such as algorithms that are continuing to grow in their use and their need and our dependency on them within our office environments as well. It's deconstructing a lot of the work that knowledge workers do. As a matter of fact, just something to think about for a moment here, like if you use any of the Microsoft products as an example, or any of the Google Suite products, I mean, have you noticed how much those tools have changed, like Microsoft Office? I mean, we can do dictation now, which is using artificial intelligence, so we can actually literally talk to our word processor in order to be able to type up a document. We can use things like computer vision, vision, which is another form of artificial intelligence, in order to be able to take a photo of a table of data that's in a printed copy and be able to pull that into Excel and turn that into a spreadsheet like immediately, all using artificial intelligence and computer vision. As a matter of fact, if you go back to thinking about your smartphone again, do you remember the time when your photos started auto-magically like sorting themselves into different albums? Like, that was just a few years ago. That was back in 2017. In 2017, after the World Economic Forum had this quote in 2016, but in 2017 is when it is that our computer vision on our phones started to get to become so good that and so precise that it started organizing our photos into albums about location or about other people that we're with in those images. That's artificial intelligence. And if you stop and think about that for a moment, we're not paying anything extra for that service. Like, our phones are just, again, automatically doing that in these photo albums. So if that's the kind of feature and functionality that's AI enabled that we're getting access to just as part of our monthly subscription within our mobile phones, our smartphones, then what other artificial intelligence algorithms and automation are available in our everyday tools, in our everyday things? And again, how is it impacting your work, and how is it impacting the work of the organization and the people that you support? And how do people feel about it? So PricewaterhouseCoopers, otherwise known as PwC, they actually ran a survey that has to do with hopes and fears. They just ran one in this particular year. And it was in response to a lot of the work that's coming out of the World Economic Forum and other types of entities or other types of similar entities, where we're seeing, because of the pandemic, that there's, again, been an acceleration in the automation of workplace processes and activities. And again, it has to do with organizations being able to compete in a world full of organizational intelligence and cognitive computing. And so the World Economic Forum just this year made another prediction that by the year 2025, that humans and machines are predicted to spend an equal amount of time on tasks, again, within the next few years here. And we're not just talking about robots anymore. We're not just talking about, physical machines. We're talking about these other types of machines like algorithms that are driven by AI and analytics that are, again, deconstructing the workplace and shifting the delineation of duties, right? How labor is divided, what do humans do versus what it is that machines do. So again, PwC does this survey, and it was really interesting because they had over 32,000 workers actually respond to the survey. And let me share some of those results with you so that we can get kind of a pulse check on what's happening with workers and the workforce around the world. How are people thinking about automation and what's happening with the way that automation is deconstructing the activities and the tasks that they do and that we do on the job? So what came out of this survey is that almost 40% of workers think that their job will be obsolete within the next 5 years. 6 in 10 are concerned about machines taking over their jobs. And 60% of workers are worried that automation is putting many of their jobs at risk, right? So our people know. And this particular survey, again, was over 32,000 people who responded in the workforce, and it was from 19 different countries around the world. So our people know this intuitively, even if we're not explicitly talking about this in our organizations, and we really should be. Our people know that this is happening, and they know it from a variety of different sources. But they also know it sort of intuitively because they can see the work environment, of course, changing around them, and especially as we continue to go through these different transitions based on a number of different trends, including the public health emergency, of course, that we have experienced. So I like this graph too, just to really provide a data visualization, just to sort of reinforce this message. How do we within human resources, how do we as being the people actually address the needs of our people? How do we help them understand the changes that are happening in the work, in the workplace, and how it's going to impact them? And then how do we use learning and talent development as disciplines enabled by the very same technologies that are causing the disruption? How do we leverage those same tools in order to be able to upskill, reskill, new skill people, to retrain them to be able to perform new tasks and sometimes new jobs and new roles overall? So I know you all can go ahead and see this slide, but again, I just wanted to reinforce with a visual some of the same data points that were coming out of that same PwC study about people's hopes and fears that has to do with automation. And you can see this is really a major concern for people. So that's kind of the challenging news, right? Like we have people who are definitely sensitive to what's happening with automation in the workforce. So what are we going to do about it? Well, here's kind of the good news that also came out of the same survey results. And that is that the majority of people, 77%, are ready to learn new skills or even to completely retrain. So we have a workforce in many cases, we have a majority of people who are ready to develop new skills and even take on new jobs for a fit for purpose workforce that can compete within this new age of cognitive computing and organizational intelligence. And even during this public health crisis, even during the pandemic, it was noted in this particular survey that 40% of workers have actually on their own improved their digital skills during the pandemic. And we know from some other research that's out there, as a matter of fact, LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning do an annual workplace report, and they just actually came out with a 2021 report. And their research actually shows that two of the biggest areas for development opportunity with our workers in our workforce, and probably ourselves included, is digital fluency, right? Being able to develop our digital skills. Think back to that previous slide and all of those different technologies that are coming into organizations, that are coming into our consumer lives, into our personal lives. Like, how are we keeping up with how those technologies impact us, even if we don't necessarily know the details about each one of those technologies themselves? But how do we understand the impact, have the digital fluency to understand the impact of the technology and the data? And the second thing that came out of the LinkedIn Learning Workplace report has to do with resilience. So resilience is basically the ability to have the coping strategies and tactics to adapt to change. And we're actually going to talk about predictive analytics and resilience a little bit further on in this presentation today. So I'm thinking, what are you thinking about with this? Are you seeing this? What are you seeing as far as retraining opportunities in your particular organization? So I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat here and give you all a moment. Are you seeing this kind of, are you seeing this kind of automation? Are you coming into your organization, and are you seeing it start to come into not just sort of the physical environment, but also into our virtual environments, into our online environments, into our knowledge worker environments as well? Are you seeing the impact? And I'm just going ahead and looking at the chat here. Let me give you a moment here to put your thoughts together. What are you seeing? Can you think of another example? Kind of like even things that are coming into our homes. So as a matter of fact, I'm actually visiting with family for the first time in more than a year, given again the public health crisis. And they're in a new home. And I'm looking at things like the Ring devices here in the United States, right? So that AI technology that's now embedded in a lot of homes, doorbells, to be able to not only provide cameras and visuals, but is using computer vision in order to be able to record any kind of activity that happens like within a certain range. In front of that particular doorbell, right? So oftentimes people's front doors or their back doors. And in some cases, it can record activity. The AI, the artificial intelligence, gets triggered by activity that's happening out on a sidewalk or out in the street, right? So you can see cars and delivery trucks kind of come and go, but you can certainly see with those Ring devices, any kind of activity that's happening like around the front or back door of your home. Do you see the Ring activities? Do you know somebody who has one, or you have one yourselves? Do you know what devices I'm talking about? Or the other device that I see commonly too, and also in this home, Nest devices. So it used to be like with a thermostat. It used to be like with the old Honeywell thermostats. I would have to know what room temperature I like based on my own sort of, anecdotal information, or sort of my own experience. And I would, set the thermostat to whatever temperature I believe is comfortable and then adjust it, accordingly. And now we have the Nest devices, which are also gathering ambient data that's happening in whatever environment it's monitoring. And then it's using artificial intelligence in order to analyze those data. And it learns your patterns over time. It learns not just an individual, but a whole family, including any pets. It learns what your comfort settings are, and it automatically adjusts. The Nest devices do. Those thermostats automatically adjust to depending on who's in the room, how many people and pets are in the room, when people and pets are absent from a room, it could automagically, right, actually drop the temperature or not take up as much energy in order to be able to reduce the workload on the HVAC system, whether it's heating or cooling in that particular part of the home or in the office. But that's some of how it is that we're starting to use these devices coming into not only the workspace, but certainly coming into our homes and certainly coming into other environments. So when it comes to that kind of energy efficiency that's being mediated by an artificially intelligent device, right? A device that's using, again, a combination of data and predictive analytics, right? Because it's predicting, it's trying to anticipate when everybody comes into the family room or everybody comes into the kitchen. It's trying to predict. That's actually the level of analytics that it's using based on the data and based on the family's pattern, which it perceives as data. It's trying to predict what the most comfortable temperature for everybody is going to be as that condition changes. And it's using artificial intelligence in order to be able to process that data real time. And by doing that, it's not only having an impact on us as people and our pets to provide a level of comfort. That's how it's providing value to us as people, and in the cases of homes with pets. But it's also providing energy cost savings, right? Because we don't even have to think about it, right? So we as humans don't have to remember to reset the thermostat to something else when it is that we're leaving the facility or leaving that particular home for the day. The machine is smart enough in order to be able to anticipate, right? Again, using predictive analytics in order to figure that out. And so then there are cost savings to it. And this is where a lot of the disruption is. This is why the automation is happening, not only at home, but happening in the workplace, is that automation is giving us the ability to provide impact. So it's providing value to people by streamlining work, making work in some cases frictionless, right? How do we remove some of the, tedious tasks? How do we remove some of the data processing? How do we remove some of that time that it takes us and our frontline, our managers, our executives, ourselves to be able to lay our hands on data in order to make a good decision? It's actually providing value to us as people in that kind of way in our workplaces challenges by providing that kind of impact, that convenience. But it's also providing back to organizations that are adopting this automation, it's providing cost savings as well, because it's, again, streamlining a lot of those processes and those types of activities. And when we talk about learning and talent development, we are talking about, quite frankly, a pretty bloated industry. So according to data from the American Society for Talent Development, or the Association for Talent Development, we have historically spent, and the number is increasing, almost 300, or now it's close to $370 billion worldwide on learning and talent development as organizations globally. And what we're seeing is that the unfortunate thing is, it's not with a lot of innovation. We've been pretty much doing the same activities and processes the same way in very similar settings, with the exception of what has happened with us with the pandemic over the past year. But even then, we're still trying to take old paradigms, right? That paradigm of the classroom. So instead of people, as an example, in learning and talent development, sitting in a physical training room at the workplace, now we're having them sit in a physical way in front of a digital experience, like with Zoom or on Microsoft Teams. But we're still creating that sort of that lecture and that sage on the stage sort of experience. That's still the bulk of what it is that organizations and people are getting for, upwards of almost $370 billion a year in organizations worldwide. And the fact of the matter is, it's not sustainable. And it's not sustainable because it's not effective. And how do I know that it's not effective? Well, here's how I know that it's not effective. If you take a look at this other statistic, also from the Association for Talent Development, from their State of the Industry report, is we're still only at a point of where 13% of any of our learning and talent development solutions are measured for performance improvement, right? So if we think about it, like, what is the purpose of training? Like, why are we trying to upskill, reskill, and new skill people in our workforce? Why are we providing training to them? Historically, it's been as an employee benefit. It's been considered just a cost of doing business. We haven't gotten much farther away from that. This number, you can look at numbers in global reports all around the world, and that statistic in particular is from Fosway, which is the leading researcher across the UK and in Europe. We haven't gotten any better as an industry in learning and talent development in being able to actually measure the results and be able to understand the results. Are we having the impact on the people? Are we having the results? Are we providing the value back to the organization that were anticipated by offering that kind of learning and talent development program? And so we're seeing a lot of automation come into learning and talent development, along with being able to use digital tools. So you can see a rise in content, right? Like LinkedIn Learning has exploded in the adoption of people using content platforms like LinkedIn Learning, or using learning experience platforms, or otherwise known as LXPs, in order to be able to curate content in order to develop people. And what's continuing to happen, though, is, again, what we're finding is that we're not using new tools in a new way and taking advantage of how it is that we can make this paradigm shift and be more effective in learning talent development. We're trying to take new tools and the new paradigm and force it into the old world, into the old paradigm. And what's going to happen is, going back to that competitive advantage, is that workforces and organizations that aren't able to, remember that quote at the beginning of this presentation from Bernard Marr, if you're not able to compete on cognitive computing and organizational intelligence, and using that to improve performance, using that to improve productivity, using that to increase innovation, using that for some of the areas that are critical, mission critical to organizational and people's success, then there's a problem. There's not only a disconnect, but there's a problem, and we're putting people and we're putting our organizations at risk. So What's happening now is that, again, we have these types of tools now embedded in many of the technologies that we're using, including the business productivity tools, right? So it doesn't even have to be artificial intelligence applied just to learning technologies specifically. It's artificial intelligence and data that we can tap into regardless of the system, regardless of how it was generated, in order to be able to better answer people questions that are going to help us make, again, going back to the beginning of the presentation, better decisions based on data. So if talent development is critical for business outcomes, we really want to know, how does your firm measure up? How does your firm measure up not only to your traditional competitors, but how does your firm even measure up to the disruptors that are coming into your industry right now? Right? So thinking about that. And we can find out now because we can sample and analyze the data that's already flowing through our organizations. And again, we're not restricted just to the people data and the data that's involved around people in our HR or L&D systems. We actually have the ability to be able to use data from throughout the organization. And what we can do is we can go ahead and take a look at what capabilities our firms, our organizations need right now. We can also take a look at and anticipate, based on these flows of data, internal to our organization and external to our organization. So extant data being data outside of our organizations, we can even figure out the capabilities that our firm is going to need in the future and then be able to close that gap, right? How do we develop our people to be able to close that gap? And not only to be able to serve the organization, but of course to serve our people too. One of the hot things that we've been talking about since the pandemic is another thing that's accelerated is the ability for internal mobility. How do we develop talent internally to be able to have the right talent pipeline to feed our succession plans, to be able to reposition for innovation in the future, especially at a time when we're finding that for some of the specialized skills, we're not able to hire, right? There's a shortage of some specialized talent that we need to be able to develop people internally. And what's really interesting about that is we can use data and artificial intelligence. And in fact, some of the research based on data and artificial intelligence is showing us that we can actually draw on talent from domains that are not even explicit or tangential to the domain that we're trying to hire from. As a matter of fact, one of the best sources of talent for data scientists, as an example, right? Data scientists is actually out of finance and accounting. And most people wouldn't necessarily even think about that those things are necessarily related, but it's actually been shown by artificial intelligence analyzing data at scale, big data, to be able to show us that one of the best domains for sourcing that kind of talent for data scientists is out of accounting and out of the finance area, as one example. So if you think about that, we have pockets of talent, right? And we have activities and deconstruction that are happening in different business functions within our organizations. When we're looking at reskilling, new skilling, and upskilling people, we might be able to retrain or new train people into entirely new roles, regardless of where it is that they came from, regardless of where they came from. And part of what we need to do as HR and as learning professionals is to take our bias out of it, right? To be aware that we as humans are automatically going to introduce bias into the decisions that we make. And if we're conscious of that, and if we work to try and mitigate that, to minimize that, then one of the things that we need to actually take a look at is how might we be able to source talent from other areas within our organization in order to be able to serve in new roles, even when we don't think that they're necessarily a match. How can we use artificial intelligence and data in order to be able to predict that kind of success in being able to new skill people into new opportunities? So something to think about. And I'm going to show you or share with you a couple of case studies here on ways that other organizations are using artificial intelligence and data to do just that. We also want to know about progress, right? When we think about progress, like if you think about like a leaderboard in anything, we can't get better unless we benchmark. We have to have a starting place. Like, where are we today? Where are we trying to go? And what's our progress? Are we making progress towards that long-term goal or not? And the difference in artificial intelligence and predictive analytics being used within the people function is that it often has to do with the sciences, of course, around people. So behavioral science, psychology, and social sciences in particular. Sometimes even anthropology and other types of sciences that have to do with people. And whenever it is that we're trying to make a change in those different domains, number one, to understand what change needs to happen, or even to understand the phenomena itself, can sometimes take time. And we can use data and artificial intelligence in order to do those analyses. And then it takes a little bit for the interventions that we implement to take hold, and for us to be able to, again, be able to analyze downstream to see if the interventions, to confirm or not, if we're making progress or not towards a longer term goal, right? It's usually stuff that's going to unfold over time, especially when we're talking about developing people into new areas. And so we want to be able to know, not to prove or to justify that we were right in our interventions. We want to be able to use analytics and to be able to use data and to be able to use artificial intelligence to figure out if we're on track or not. If we're not on track, to be able to figure out what amends we need to make, what changes in course we need to, what adjustments we need to make in order to be able to get on track or to stay on track. We can also use the analytics in order to be able to identify solutions, right? Potential solutions that are going to work. And we can also use AI and data and analytics in order to be able to experiment. And this is a big deal. Now, in learning and talent development, many people have come from an academic background, and much of the industry has been modeled on academia. And what basically happens in that academic environment is, when you think about like a master's program or you think about a doctoral program, is people have to defend their thesis. It's part of the academic experience. It's part of their education, is that you have to defend the solution or the approach that you're proposing. And so we find in workplace learning that people oftentimes, instead of doing an honest assessment of the interventions that they've introduced into the organization and taking a look at if they're making progress or if those interventions are on track or not, we oftentimes are trying to use data and artificial intelligence in order to prove, again, to justify that we were right, when what it is that we should be doing is to improve. The workplace is not academia. It's another one of those biases or limitations that we have gotten from another domain in our life that we have to just have some awareness of, and then be conscious of how it is that we move past. And that's a significant culture change for many of us. We're not used to being okay with failing. We're not used to being okay with experimenting at a small scale, using data and oftentimes artificial intelligence to find out if it's the right solution or not. And if it's not, how do we tweak it or even eliminate it, right, without feeling like we've somehow failed? And if it is on track, if we can tell through the data and the artificial intelligence that this is making progress and this solution seems to be the right fit for a fit for purpose workforce for whatever segment of our population we are working on developing, then we can use those data to have some confidence to make the investment in time and money and effort to be able to scale the program. So experimentation and that being okay with failing, right, at a lower level with a smaller sample, with testing something out before it is that we make a big commitment in platform, make a big commitment in a program, and especially for the big stuff that takes time. Like, think about our leadership development programs. Our leadership development and high potential programs, as an example, are usually multi-year programs. We don't want to get to the end of 2 years or 3 years or 4 years with something as critical as those types of initiatives that are meant to develop our people in order to be able to serve the organization and themselves in a future state, and get all the way to the end of that program and then do a summative evaluation evaluation and figure out that it didn't work, there's no second chances, right? The world will have moved on. We're not going to get a second chance to be able to use that time and use those resources or work with those people or help the organization again. So we need to be able to use data and analytics and artificial intelligence right now to make sure that we're making progress or not. And a lot of that has to do with confidence. A lot of that has to do with, again, being able to develop our digital fluency in these areas, to get comfortable with the technologies and get comfortable with the data and an analytical methodology to be able to make these inquiries early, build up our competence so that we can build up our confidence, so that when it is that we're speaking with line managers, when we're speaking with the people that we're developing, the people that are in our programs that are being touched directly by these interventions, when we're talking to our executives, when we're talking to the CHRO, when we're talking to the board of directors, when we're talking to external stakeholders, like we have some confidence, like, is our program working or not? Are we making progress or not? And we're finding that this is even a bigger deal right now because of risk. And what has also accelerated during the pandemic has now, especially for publicly traded companies, although it's beginning to have an impact on private companies and nonprofits as well, is risk. And what I mean by that is human capital risk, right? So a lot of times, many people in human resources get a little upset about human capital or the words human capital because they think that it's minimizing people to a monetary value. It's not. Human capital isn't about the people. Human capital is about the type of the intangible value that people in our workforce actually create. So if you think about things like relationships, if you think about things like the organizational knowledge, if you think about things like intellectual property, if you think about brand, right, delivering on brand, those are all the types of intangible value that humans create. It's that intangible value that actually is the definition of human capital. And so the investment that we make in our workers and our workforce in order to be able to produce that human capital, that's where the risk is. If we're not making the right investments, if the investments that we're making go off track and we have no visibility or no illumination in being able to understand that they're off track, and we can't provide a way of being able to intervene and course correct, that's when we're putting people in the organization at risk. And we're starting to see, like here in the United States, we now have the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, as of November of 2020, has increased what the requirements for what publicly traded companies in the United States have to report to external stakeholders. And so now we have external stakeholders that are going to want to know how it is that our internal processes are developing people. And in order to be able to have those kinds of internal controls, to be able to understand if our DE&I efforts are on track, if our leadership development is on track, if our management development is on track, if our high potentials are on track, compliance, safety training is on track. I mean, any of the high visibility, anything that is of material impact to the operations of the business, that's what we're now required to report. We have to be able to have some confidence that we're providing our executives and our external stakeholders and our people with good information that's based on data. And we can use artificial intelligence and data and analytics at scale in order to be able to do that. Okay, so we're going to need to be able to answer these types of questions and be able to do it with some kind of substantive evidence to be able to support whatever our claims are, right? So it was really interesting to me. One of the other things that just came out of the LinkedIn Learning 2021 workplace report is that by and far, out of the top 10 ways that any measurement is being done on learning and talent development at all, the first 5 all have to do with employee surveys. Now, employee surveys and feedback loops are really important. They're critical, but alone are not enough. We need other ways of being able to measure, to be able to connect our people strategy to our organizational strategy in order to be able to answer questions about these different types of categories. So How are you, with any level of confidence, able to answer questions about efficiency, effectiveness, your ability to, in developing people and learning and development programs, are they helping to improve service? Are they keeping pace with compliance? We're seeing, of course, compliance accelerate as business conditions change, as competitive landscape changes. Um, can you answer questions about developing the next generation of leaders? How are you feeding that succession pipeline? How about advancing again? How are you connecting people strategy to business strategy and business operations through data? How are we even using learning and talent development as a talent magnet, right, for talent acquisition to be even able to attract, especially top performers, high performers, and specialized skills to our organizations? How can we position our ability and our effectiveness in developing people in that we have substantive data enabled proof that it's working? How are we able to compete in that kind of way as an employer brand? How are we helping with, again, talent acquisition? And how are we helping with talent retention? We've seen over and over and over again in research that's been done over the past decade that more and more people will take development opportunities and confidence. Our workforce, our people want to have confidence that the organization is going to develop them and help them develop the skills that they need in order to compete, in order for them to advance in their careers, in order for them to be able to future-proof themselves, right? As they know, again, thinking of earlier in the presentation, how much automation is coming in to disrupt them. They want to have the confidence that we're actually developing them, right? But again, at the end of the day, we not only know that most learning and talent development are not actually measuring to that level to make those types of connections, but we also know, based on a lot of research, and this number actually comes from Gartner, but that 45% out of the learning that we do, the corporate training that we provide in organizations, 45% of it is scrap. And it's scrap just like we would see in a manufacturing environment. And that is, it's training that was delivered, but it's not actually applied back in the workplace. And instead, we often rely on superstition rather than on data. And this is just a quick scene out of the scouts from the movie Moneyball. If you remember, if you ever saw the movie Moneyball that stars Brad Pitt, and it talks about how it is that the Oakland A's, the team, the baseball team, actually started working with their players and winning teams by using data and analytics to improve player performance and recruiting practices. And these are some of the scouts that had all sorts of different subjective ideas over the years and sort of industry lore as far as what works and what doesn't work. And they were making business decisions based on that rather than making business decisions based on data and evidence that was available. So it doesn't mean that evidence-based practice or data necessarily trumps or supersedes your experience or your expertise. It's what we want to use in addition to. And we have such prevalence of it now and access to it now that we want to make sure that we're using the tools that we have available. So let's take a look at some of the AI and the automation that's actually happening within our organizations that can help us to be more proficient with data and more proficient with analytics, where we can use artificial intelligence to not only process historical data, but actually help us to process and analyze and respond, make decisions on data real time. So it starts off with thinking about mindset. We have to reset our mindset and really have an understanding of, and again, be honest and candid with ourselves, the people that we support in our organizations. What are we aiming for? Like, what metrics and where are we at? Like, where are we currently at? And what are we doing in order to improve? What are we doing in order to move from where we're at to what our target goal is? And how are we going to measure progress along the way? And that means now we're taking on accountability to move from outputs to outcomes. It's not just about creating programs or creating things, it's about actually producing those results and having an impact on people. So what are the tools that we would need in order to be able to do this if we're going to develop our talent? It could also be have, buy, build, or bridge, right? How are we developing our talent? And so one of the ways that I like to think about artificial intelligence is that we can use artificial intelligence in sort of three different ways. We can use artificial intelligence as a do-it-yourself, a do-it-with-you, or a do-it-for-you. So we can fully automate or we can augment our people practices right now, especially around learning and talent development. And there's a reference here. I wrote a whole article about this, which is available actually on Unleash, that's all about these three different categories. So let's take a look at some of the types of artificial intelligence and data tools that we can use in do-it-yourself, do-it-with-you, and do-it-for-you. And do-it-for-you, of course, would be fully automated solutions. The other two being ways that we can augment our current activities and practices. So we're going to use artificial intelligence, or we're using artificial intelligence in order to personalize, right? Not to demographics, into demographic categories, but down to individuals. How are we using artificial intelligence to really personalize experience and learning and talent development initiatives down to individual people at scale? How are we using it to accelerate, right, their ability to be able to not only learn new skills, but apply them back on the job? And how are we using it to optimize, to create these feedback loops to figure out when we're making progress or not? And when we're not, how it is that we get things back on track again? And if we are, how is it that we might be able to strengthen those opportunities? And there's another article that I wrote for Tech Target that goes into this in a much, it was an interview that I did with Tech Target that goes into much deeper information on this. But we can leverage prediction and prescription, right? We can really automate what's happening with artificial intelligence. We can use, again, machine learning and artificial intelligence for efficiency and effectiveness, and we can use it for impact. How do we, the number one thing that we can do for our people is not only develop them and help them with internal mobility, but how do we also make their jobs easier, right? Help them to learn the automation tools that augment their practice, that remove the friction from their work. Okay, so a do-it-for-you packaged AI solution. So this is where you don't even know that it's artificial intelligence that's working, other than it's embedded within the practice. And so this is a sanitized case study, just to give you an idea. You can see on the left-hand side, this was actually for a very large management consulting firm that used artificial intelligence, a whole package solution where it ran 250 different AI-driven algorithms in order to be able to provide personalization, optimization, and acceleration to existing training materials. So they were trying to develop their people in a particular way. They had them going into a learning management system to be able to access content, and they added this packaged artificial intelligence solution that uses these 250 different algorithms in order to be able to improve the experience for each individual person. And you can see how it's connecting the people strategy to the business strategy. We can see on the left-hand side that the business metric, the target metric for the business, are in the column in the squares that are in blue on the left-hand side. So how to increase revenue, how to decrease cost, how to reduce risk. We can see a little bit more about the definitions, like what goes into that. So when we're talking about increased revenue, in the shaded green in the next column over, we can see like it means top line growth. When we're talking about decreased cost, what does that mean? That means spending less time in training and spending less on third-party content. And when we're talking about reducing risk, we're talking about improving process adherence and eliminating knowledge gaps, right? So then you get more into the definitions, and then you get into how do we measure at the people level and at the program level, all the way on the right-hand side. And what actually became the outcome for this particular program, was that they were able to tell through processing data real time using artificial intelligence that there was a pre-assessment that was part of the program that they removed entirely because it actually had no impact on improving the outcomes of that program for the people or for the organization. But they were able to connect the dots through those algorithms, being able to provide and analyze the data real time in order to be able to provide these types of insights to make a better decision. And you can see the reduction in time and the number of hours that were saved based on all of that. The last couple of quick case studies here as we wind up for today have to do with speed to competency, leadership development, and accelerating your compliance training. How do we do it with a solution that's a do it with you? It's not just automated like the 250 algorithms, but it's actually doing it with you. And actually, this is pretty cool because this case study is actually a session that's happening later on today with Emma Weber from learning transfer that's going to be talking about the Coach M artificial intelligence chatbot. But you can improve speed to competency, leadership development, and accelerate compliance training and be able to get an uplift in the development of people and that learning transfer of taking what they learned and applying it back on the job. And the last thing for a do-it-yourself has to do with predictive analytics, with a project that I worked on in developing personal resilience. And we were able to use analytics and predictive analytics in order to predict who most likely would or wouldn't take what they learned in a training workshop on coping strategies and coping tactics for dealing with, changes that are happening in the work environment, and people being able to develop their resilience. We were able to actually use those data to predict who most likely would or wouldn't actually take what they learned and apply it back on the job, and which managers might or might not support what was the changes that were necessary in applying what they learned back in the work environment, and then being able to provide targeted interventions based on the analyses that came back from those assessments in the predictive analytics. And there's a number of different ways that we were able to again, diagnose what was happening and then get ahead of it by being able to pinpoint and provide course correction instead of waiting months at a time. And this is some of the stuff that we can do like in the first 30 days. Like, you don't have to wait years and years and years to implement these programs. You can start using this type of predictive analytics again and get some success very, very quickly, both with your frontline as well with your managers, and have good data to go back to your executives with and tie it back up all the way from people strategy to business goals. So last thing as we close here, skill set, David, sorry. I've got an assessment for you. This is actually free from the Learning and Performance Institute based out of London. I actually worked on the analytics. I led the team for the analytics and the technology competencies. You can take this assessment for free online. It'll produce a report for you. You'll be able to see like your digital fluency, like where are some of your gaps that could inform an independent learning plan. And if you want to take that learning plan and go ahead and come back to me, I'm happy to schedule a 15-minute one-on-one. I've got a whole little intake process, but if you're interested in having a conversation about how to upskill yourself with artificial intelligence and data analytics and getting ahead of your own digital fluency and have a conversation about that, this is my contact information, and go ahead and reach out and we'll go ahead and have a one-on-one conversation about that. David, thanks so much for the time today, and to everybody for their investment.
Wow, so much information here. We do have to get moving to the next session, but I promise everybody that's on that you'll get Trish's contact information, a link to the recording, and the amazing stuff you do, Trish. Incredible. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.